Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a series that aims to provide hope, an avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have two special guests, Dwayne and Carrie Daunt. We had interviewed Carrie several weeks ago on her work at the JP2 Healing Center in Tallahassee. Her father, Dr. Bob Schutz, founded the ministry. Dwayne has his own job outside of the ministry, but is well versed in technology and helps the ministry out there as he is called upon to do as well. They put together a very interesting book, a timely book, Man Your Post, Learning to Lead Like St. Joseph. And we're going to go through, part of the book has got so much in it, there's no way we're going to get through it all today, but you can get the book at the JP2, it's JPII healingcenter.org, and it's also available, of course, at Amazon. But welcome back, Carrie, and welcome to Mercy Unbound, Dwayne. Great to have you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you for having us.
You know, you've got a lot of interesting stories in here from people, different perspectives. Once was a Major League Baseball player, 5-time All-Star player, a priest, his story, a family physician, a counselor, and many, many more. Just as an aside, I had interviewed Father Delaney, who's the rector of St. Joseph's Oratory in Montreal. And of course, St. Andre Bessette, it's where he worked as a humble doorkeeper, but he had a great devotion to St. Joseph. We had the year of St. Joseph. So we're going to go into a little detail of your take on why St. Joseph, but really what led you guys to write this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from our standpoint, there was just looking in and feeling what was going on just within society and our culture at the time. So my background, looking back, a lot of, guidance from St. Joseph and coverage, but I didn't have a father growing up, from that standpoint. So raised by a single mom. Was fortunate enough to have a lot of men in my life. One of the biggest impacts was my grandfather, just able to spend time with him over the summers. Wasn't all the time, but just someone who exuded a lot of work ethic, a lot of good values he instilled in me, but just missing that component, and just seeing, how the world was operating with just a lack of just men being involved in the family, guiding and leading and providing that coverage. Just really seeing, I think the story that we share is, with 8 kids, a 9th on the way, don't have a lot of free time. So, I think I was on the mower one day. It's my quiet time, a couple of times, and I do my critical thinking and just, coming in with Carrie, just telling her, just seeing everything that was going on, and just really just a lack of men being in that position. And then within the military, just, what happens when you don't do your duty or you're not at your position or your post, and what happens, the enemy runs in that space, that weak point identifies it, and that's where they come into it. And just seeing that correlation just really drove that point home for me, and just really just a lack of coverage and just guidance by men. And just from my standpoint, also with Carrie's dad, with Bob, just again, just having just very blessed, fortunate relationships that I've had in my life, just really drove it towards that. And just, just seeing that lack of coverage we're having, just what's going on, I think would be addressed by a lot of times if men just step back into that role they're supposed to have and just do it in a godly way. So it's kind of what initiated the conversation. That was several years ago, before we had a break to write it, and then COVID hit, which gave us an opportunity to kind of do that, which was, fortuitous timing and blessed timing for us, from that standpoint. So
yeah, and it happened to be, Brian, you'll appreciate this, talking about like this year of St. Joseph that happened. Like, so we had this book in mind, we were percolating on it, sitting on it, simmering on it for 12 years. And the day after we signed the contract of the book, the Pope announced that it would be the year of St. Joseph. And we thought, oh, wow, like, Lord, you're so good that you waited for your perfect timing to do this. So,
Again, we had interviewed you, Carrie, because you had written a book on healing in women. And I'd never really had anybody on to talk about that. And that was a great show. And I'd encourage people to go back and watch that one. And then you're Dwayne, and you guys working on St. Joseph and Man Your Post. So I thought this is really good, because we we live in a generation, plagued by faithlessness, fear. Men are angry. Gosh, the road rage. It goes on, and you go, who's their role model today in society? Who do these people look up to? I mean, so why Saint Joseph? Really? Well,
Yeah, no, I mean, looking back, I mean, one of the biggest change events I had too is we went actually to a St. Joseph retreat with Bob when I was just out of school, out of college, and it was just what adoration just being there. But just really, I mean, if you look at an example of just an absolute, godly man with leadership. I mean, everything he took on from, I mean, imagine the pressure of not only, showing up, getting married, having a family, but then raising the Son of God, and just the role he had to step in and just lead. And then, the other side of it is there's not a single word captured by, St. Joseph anywhere. So just a godly man, just leading, not complaining about the burden that he has, just stepping into it. I mean, just to me, it's just an absolute prime example of how you lead. I mean, with my background, again, just a lot of leadership. I enjoy learning about leadership and methodologies and how that happens, but just how, sometimes a lot of it is just what you do, not necessarily what you say. And just a man that just filled that role, protected his family with everything he had. I see a lot of great images in my head of just working in the shop with, him and Jesus, just doing carpentry stuff and sharing that father and son knowledge. I mean, just a great example from that standpoint, and the joy there. So from my standpoint, I don't know if you have a better picture of what it looks like to lead in a masculine way, strong way, but in a godly way as well. So I mean, it was just a natural fit for me, and always been drawn to him over time. So it's just a really good fit, I think, overall. Just matched it very well. So yeah.
Yeah, and if you notice too, that the spine of the book is actually the litany of Saint Joseph, which is actually all the virtues of the church. So it's Joseph most just, Joseph most chaste, Joseph most courageous, and really that's where each chapter is framed. Like, how do we practice these virtues like Joseph? And because, as Dwayne said, there isn't a single word recorded of him. We know this by his life of virtue, by his actions, by his being just and not exposing Mary to shame, and his courageous way in which he followed and listened to the Lord in obedience and moved in those places. And so the desire was that Saint Joseph would be this centering point for men to be able to look at, like a real, Christ obviously is our most masculine example of standing at your post as he stood at the cross, as he allowed himself to be subject in his humanity to death and to suffering. But Saint Joseph, like us, have sin and struggle, and he still was able to lead such a beautiful life of virtue. And I think that's why so many people now are so drawn to him, because there's a vacuum, there's a void. And he really is such a beautiful example of fatherhood and faithfulness.
Yeah, really just lay down his life for his family, really. Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny you talk about man your post, but common saying is don't just talk the talk, walk the walk. In St. Joseph, you look at scripture and it's like the only part says he was a just man. So they're not putting in there like he's talking the talk, but he just walked the walk. Yep. One of my favorite prayers when I was a child, and I actually saw a statue of this one time. I was speaking in Saskatchewan, Canada, but it was a dying St. Joseph, and around him was Jesus. And the prayer was, "May I die like you, St. Joseph, in the arms of Jesus and Mary." Yeah. And I thought, how powerful that is, Well, let's get into the book a little bit. She talked about carry all these virtues and things. The very first chapter was Joseph most just, and Mike Sweeney was a professional baseball player, and he gives his perspectives on Joseph and being just. Could you share some thoughts from that chapter?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and just to get a little bit more structure. So each of the chapters, I mean, from a men's perspective, I really thought it was important that, and Carrie and I agreed that there is kind of an action plan. Like, guys like to know what to do in steps. So really, it's we get a quote from Pope, Saint Pope John Paul II, and then really a story by a lot of just men that you and I can identify with out there. So that have gone through a lot of the trials and tribulations and things that we have dealt with. So it's not like this holier than thou where I can never be that type of person. and then really going to for reflection questions. What I enjoy is the mobilizing the mission, like the action, like what it comes out to. And they're really, it's succinct, it's to the point. From our standpoint, it's important for men to have something that they can come out of it with, and then have some action. Really, you can pick up any chapter you feel called for. You don't have to read it in order. So I think it's a lot of flexibility there too. That's where we're hoping it really is, draws men into it from that standpoint. And then a closing prayer really from that chapter. So that's kind of each of the sections are built out is really very clear, very relatable, very actionable from that standpoint.
Yeah,
so,
starting off too with an introduction of what that particular virtue is.
Correct. Yeah.
So, we lay out this idea of what does it mean to be just? What does it mean to be a man who is just like Joseph, and what I thought was really beautiful is Mike Sweeney, everyone kept suggesting that we use him for the book, but he's a busy guy and he's hard to get a hold of and well known. But gosh, he was so gracious, and he was our last person, but it's the first, virtue that's highlighted. And I think in my mind or in our mind, we were thinking with justice, there's so much now about social justice and living in this place. And I feel like what the Lord really highlighted with Mike was how was Joseph just? And it was living in this his exact post, and I think it's so beautiful to see a man like Mike Sweeney, who had every opportunity, every fortune at his fingertips, at his disposal as he grew into this famous baseball player, to really be kept being drawn back into the heart of his fatherhood, and just through the example of many holy men in his life, and wanting to stand in that place for his family and make a difference. And gosh, his testimony is so beautiful, especially as he talked about all the years where he was tempted, to fall into places of sin, and
that professional athlete lifestyle you hear about, and not only his family, but all the men that he impacted, that he interacted with on the team or the staff. It's just that legacy he leaves behind, right? Not just for his direct family, just all those men around him that saw that, and how you act, right? Not necessarily what you say, but how he actually behaved is important. So men are drawn to that. So great. And actually, from a timing perspective, everybody's, COVID was not a great time, but really it was interesting that a lot of these men that we probably would not have had time to do this work, or usually traveling or heavily involved in ministry, they actually were very almost open to it and were craving it. So we had a very quick response, for the men, yes, I definitely want to be involved, and they had a window to do it. So actually, and again, just that blessed timing. It wasn't a great time for the world, but it really allowed this book to come together really, really quickly and open to it. So it was a really great timing for us from that standpoint. Very blessed. So.
Yeah, and I almost feel like you were saying, they were eager. It was this collective sense
excitement.
of excitement of yes, this is what's happening in our world today. And each of these men just were already feeling that stirring in their heart to speak into it. So it was just these natural outpourings of their own heart, and where the Lord had already been bringing them through this process, that it was really beautiful. And like Dwayne said, we had all of these different voices just to kind of speak to different aspects of it. And when we set out to do it, we were just, a lot of the work that we do at the Healing Center is on identity. And we talked about that a little bit in our last interview about, masculine and feminine identity. And, so we had a lot of different options as far as men, but it just seemed like the leaders of the church during this time were the ones who all stepped forward right away and said, I want to do this. So almost, every person in this book is a leader in the church in some capacity. They have these really beautiful, Scott Hahn wrote the foreword. Gosh, what a gift that was, but
if I could jump in on that, because I remember reading, correct me if I'm wrong, but Scott actually lived down the street from your dad.
Yeah,
which was unknown until they started talking, and it's like the Google map kept coming smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah, their brothers were best friends. Their older brothers are best friends, and they live down the street from each other. And now it's really beautiful. They connected a couple of years ago, and now they have a really cute friendship. It's really fun. It's they little boys again, so it's really cute.
Come full circle.
Yeah.
One thing I enjoyed about the book, because I'm one who I never had a theology class. I find it difficult to read, but when you bring it down to personal stories and examples of human beings, putting it all together and bringing it down to my level, it just makes it so much better. And so I do think you like Mike maybe hit a home run on that one. Let's go on to the next one here. Most chaste. And I thought this was an interesting quote from Pope John Paul II. Only chaste men and chaste women are capable of love. Well, the world right away would just snarl at that one. And then you go, well, what is love? Is it the erotic? Is it the agape? All these different types of love. And yet, if you're chaste and then you become one, it's so much more fulfilling. But Andrew Laubacher has a degree in theology. Is he still in the seminary? Did he discern another vocation, or where's he at with that?
Yeah, he's doing full-time ministry work right now, actually.
Okay.
So he did discern out of seminary. Yeah, but he's definitely living in.
Yeah, he was actually Tallahassee for a little bit and just moved recently, so we got to see him a little bit more often. But yeah, he's back on the road, I think, full time pretty much now.
But it was funny. My kids have been we have older kids. They went to lots of different Steubenville conferences, which are these great, wonderful, joyful, charismatic conferences for kids. And my kids came back talking about Andrew. They call him Alob. He's a speaker, singer, worship leader, and they were like, his story was so amazing. It was just so amazing. And they kept so as we were talking about the story, they kept saying, no, you got to call him, just call him. And so anyway, that was a really neat, just fortuitous thing, because he ended up, just becoming a friend of our families, my dad's and Dwayne and I, and over for dinner and those kind of things. But just, he really, his life and his struggle with chastity, and he shares about his addiction to pornography, which I think is rampant now. I think it's, we like to pretend like, these sexual addictions are something that happens to these outliers, but really, I mean, I think it's so pervasive. What is the average age that a child is exposed to pornography now? Is like 11.
Yeah. Same age as him, I think, in his story.
In his story. Yeah. And so just his courage to be able to share his struggle, I think a struggle that so many young people share, old people, like all, alike, was really impactful, I think, for our children. But then as we began to think about, why do we have this gap in our culture? Like, why are we having such an issue with men stepping forward? And I think so many of us find ourselves not free, like we're in bondage in some place or another. And that chastity, which is not synonymous, with celibacy. I think so often we put those two things together, like if I'm chaste, then I'm celibate. But really, like, chastity is what we're all called to, which is just this integrated part of our bodies and our souls. Like, it's the way in which we live out our lives in order to love fully, like you were saying. Like, there's so many different definitions of love, but it's a full love. It's not a lust. It's a giving of yourself. It's a laying down your life. And so often, in our way in growing in virtue, we have to learn how to die to ourselves. And his whole story is about his journey towards getting freedom in this place of this sexual addiction, and like that being about a journey of self-mastery, and
also just but also just engaging other folks to help them. You can't do it by yourself. So again, just that team approach you need, and then relying on men. Again, I think we have that. And that's probably, some of Justin's stories too, that self-reliance that we, as men, we pick up sometimes, where you need help and you need support from other men that are around you. So again, I think hopefully with other folks reading the story and realizing that it impacts so many people. And just, I think the part that stands out to me is just he talks about being in the dark with it, right? Just hiding that, how that feels and how that impacts so many other facets of his life, I think is really important. So yeah, just tremendous him to step up. He shares that story all the time, but just, and again, young guy, relatable, everybody can see that. So if something he's struggling with and is sharing, how did I then, look at myself and make sure that I'm living the right lifestyle from that standpoint again. So yeah, just a great addition, and always enjoy having Alob around and visiting with the boys and the girls. So yeah.
You make a good point there, Dwayne, about it's important to reach out and ask for help. The world would look on that as a sign of weakness.
Absolutely, yeah.
But in actuality, it's a sign of strength. And you both know, like in 12th step, the first step is I have a problem and I can't figure it out and I'm overcome by it. And that's not just pornography, but there's many of these. And so I think it's important for our viewers to know that don't look on this as a weakness. That's the first step in getting this thing figured out. And
Yeah, that's what carries a lot with the healing ministries. I think almost everyone's like, I'm the only person that's dealt with this, and it's a struggle that I only have, and that's not really, it's unique, but everybody has similar nature. So again, reaching out, I think, and then I think people would be surprised that people are out there want to help, like we want to be engaged if there's things you need. But it's hard. I mean, I'm just as bad as a parent, and reaching out when I need just stuff around the house. Sometimes you take too much on, so it is a struggle on a daily basis to realize I do have a limit. I need support. There's other folks that may have their viewpoints or help me with that, or just keep me accountable, right? Just having that structure is important. So,
and it's kind of exciting for me to see people start to realize that we're not just mortal beings who are here and then we die. We're spiritual beings in a mortal body, but the spirit lives on. And it's like I have a son who's big into weights and takes great care of his body, and fortunately he is spiritually involved as well, but most people don't even think of the spiritual life and the personal virtues that we're trying to focus on. So this to me is exciting, is hopefully people will come to realize, just ask for help. It's like the ABCs of divine mercy. A is ask for his mercy. Same thing. Be merciful, trust in the Lord. The next one I want to talk about was most prudent. Justin, and I may be pronouncing his last name wrong, Beyonce, his parents were divorced when he was a young child. That has long-term ramifications people don't realize, maybe till much older. But can you talk to us about how that evolved in his life, and what was a lesson for us all in that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Justin he's such a gift to the church. I don't know if many people know, he's actually one of the founders of Fraternus, which is this beautiful organization that teaches virtue to young men, young boys who grow into young men. And he's really involved also in the center, the John Paul II Healing Center, and his work. But he really lives a life of prudence. Like he has this beautiful he's a financial planner, he's written books about this. Like he understands like the importance of like really looking ahead and planning and those kind of things. But he talks about so vulnerably, and I was really struck the first time I read it. I just, a lot of emotion, but just, he was only 7 and he was the oldest when his parents divorced, in this place where he took it on as a child. Like, I have to be responsible. And with that, like Dwayne was saying, like he didn't learn to ask for help. Like, he had to figure it out on his own. And a lot of times he just found himself failing or getting into a situation early on in ministry where he had this beautiful organization set up, this as Fraternus, as he was growing it. And like he talks about it almost coming to an end.
Yeah, failing
because of his lack of ability to ask for help, to look at the men around him who had surrounded him, who had given him guidance along the way, but to say, okay, like, what do I do? I've gotten to this point, but he knew he didn't have all the skill set to get to the other points that he needed to go.
One of my favorite lines, I think, of his that I read is, using tools that are unfamiliar to me, making the situation worse. So he's in there, I could just see him under the sink trying to do plumbing, and then you had a huge leak versus a small drip that he had before that. So yeah, I think it's, not leveraging again, kind of similar to, the other stories of asking for help. And he's got a great set of resources around him that have men in the business world that have probably done some amazing things, but if you don't leverage that or seek that help, he's just making the situation worse. And sometimes there's a pride factor there. But in his standpoint, I think it's more the self-reliance that came out of that, his dad leaving so early, right? And as you said, I think divorce has a generational effect. And you hear that in a couple of stories, early divorces and how it impacts relationships, and how that, and as a father and parenting and stuff and their relationship. So it's definitely, unfortunately, it's so prevalent nowadays too. It just fractures society in so many ways. So definitely impacted him.
Yeah, and I thought it was really beautiful that the whole organization that came out of this process for him was Fraternus, which is a volunteer organization that relies on fathers, to step into those places, and that they all have to rely on each other. And I thought that was just a beautiful way of saying, like if I hadn't been submitting to his desire to grow in this virtue, like, this has had this beautiful ripple effect. My obedience in this place, to watching men learn how to step into those roles with their own children, with their own sons, and teaching young men. I mean, that's what they do, is teach them these virtues in a really practical, fun way. Like, they really get very deeply involved in their faith at a young age. It's very impactful. We had a chapter here for a while, and these boys were on fire for their faith. So it's really beautiful to watch
The fruits of that.
the fruit
yeah.
of his struggle, and the way that really put him in those places of his obedience and that.
Yeah, impact again. Lots and lots of young men out there now, so it's just taking
Mhm.
it for good. So it's just been great to see.
People, we're talking about Dwayne and Carrie Daunt's book, Man Your Post, Learning to Lead Like St. Joseph. It's available, of course, at Amazon, but also I encourage you to go get it from the JPII for two, JP2healingcenter.org. Got a lot of virtues we're going to still talk about. The next one was most courageous. And of course, courage is such an important virtue, and we're under attack, and it's tough out there. But Dr. Tom Nelson, I could relate being a physician in the dying, which of course is a big part of our work, praying for the dying. But can you share with us most courageous, and what did Dr. Tom Nelson share?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I took from his story, is just how one kind of moment of weakness, maybe on his part, saying yes, just dramatically changed his life and everything he did from that standpoint. Just taking that inspiration from the Holy Spirit, saying yes, and being open to change, and doing it and stepping into it. Yeah, just just how much that's impacted him, his family. He's a good friend of our family now too, as well. And then just all the folks that are in that area, the folks that he treats, as a physician, and just what he dealt with. I mean, I think we're so scared and concerned, and sometimes of saying yes to stepping into, like, I'm not prepared, I'm not an expert in that area, I don't know anything, that those fears that we have. And he just abandoned all that and just stepped into it, and just dramatically changed his life and those around him. It's just a great story from his side. So
yeah, I love this story. I mean, I feel like it has this beautiful, like, we think of courage, I think, so often as like being in an arena, like these big moments, or like on the battlefield. But like, here he was in his doctor's office, and this sweet woman across from this elderly woman was dying, and she has no family, no friends, and she asks him,
I need your help.
I need your help. Can you be there? And basically he walks with her as she's dying. Like he's as like a family member, a friend, like just by her side in the last weeks of her life,
the most vulnerable moments.
yeah, really. And really getting to know her. And ultimately, this woman who did not even have faith, he brought her to the faith, and she received her sacraments, and she ended up just leaving this beautiful legacy through him. Like it impacted his life and his practice, and the way that he saw his patients, and their dignity and their goodness. And he's had such a tremendous impact on so many people in the church, just through that one yes, that one moment of courage, which I think is just a good reminder for each of us. Like, we don't think our yeses matter, our small momentary things.
Yeah, to Carrie's point, it doesn't have to be the biggest. It's small moments in time that can have that ripple effect and just change and impact lives all over. So yeah,
well, it's kind of like the spirituality of Saint Therese, the little way, the little things we do in life. We don't, I've traveled all over the world with Divine Mercy, but I tell people, you don't need it. You're not going to be called most likely to go to Africa or South America, but you're called to live mercy right in your home. And it is like Mary's fiat. What if Dr. Tom would have said, well, I'm too busy.
Right. And what if St. Joseph had said that in that moment? Like, I'm sorry, this is weird.
This is not what I planned for. Like, this is not what I envisioned my life to be like.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. This isn't going the way I want it to.
Correct. Yeah. It's not my plan. So sorry. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, just a great story. We love. Yeah. And Dr. Tom, again, just a dear friend of ours and the family. So yeah, he's great man, great influence, and just a great example for that small yes. Yeah.
And again, those small yeses, like you said, Carrie, our life's really a bunch of chapters, and we're so focused on right now, but those small yeses will have the big ripple effect in the future chapters. Obedience is another kind of term people, Americans are used to doing it my way, as Frank Sinatra would sing. And I think of Saint Joseph, and listened to the angel and said, no, it's okay. And this is God's plan. And fleeing of Egypt, I kid people, what would my wife say if I tell her tonight, come on, wake me up in the middle of the night, and I tell her we gotta move. Just a couple suitcases. We're moving to Tallahassee. The Lord told me, she'd probably say,
I'm
roll.
going back to sleep.
There's nothing to do there. There's nothing to do there, Brian.
Why'd you wake me up? I'm going back to sleep.
But authentic obedience is rooted in love, and harsh and hypocritical voices, which so many of us can use our tongue not wisely to build up the kingdom, drive people far away. I really enjoyed Father Burke Master's story. It really touched me. Share with us some of his thoughts on all this.
Yeah, so unfortunately for Father Burke, though, he's not. There's a legacy in Tallahassee that's not great for him, since he beat our baseball team in like the super regional round one time with a grand slam like the bottom of the ninth. So FSU. So yeah, so he's got a legacy in Tallahassee. That's a mixed version sometimes. Pre-priest life, but no, great man. Yeah, I mean, I think when you hear obedience, I think it's, kind of like a lot of the other terms, it has a negative connotation about it, but really, are you doing the right thing at the right time and being called to do it? I think so. It's not necessarily, I think people think obedience, it's more pushing you down versus where we see with him, it's calling you into where you need to be and really fulfilling your calling and being the greatest you can be, right? So that's the biggest thing. But his story, yeah, I mean, obviously from his standpoint, again, an athlete, top performer, had a plan. We just joked about what he thought his life was going to look like, and then completely being called away from that. And then does he make the decision to follow that calling and be obedient, or does he fight against it and push back and not follow it? And then by him being obedient, just again, the impact that he's had, I mean, around the world globally, and the things he's done is just amazing. And then on the backside, still being involved with the Cubs, on his side, and just having that relationship. So he's fulfilling both things that he loves really passionately about, because he was obedient and said yes, really. So just again, that saying yes and following God's plan, and necessarily what we see in the near term, but really the long-term effects. I mean, just a great story again. Yeah.
I think that there's one line in it that really stood out to me, that he said, he was at a retreat and the priest said, he said, kids ask the wrong question when they're talking about vocations. He said, they ask, what do I want to do when I grow up? He said, but the priest challenged them at the retreat. He said, the question we should be asking is, what does God want me to do? And he said, because in that place is where I'm going to find the most joy and fulfillment. And there's just something that struck me about that, because we do often make these obedient choices, like, okay, Lord, I'm going to be open to life. And, here we are in our late 40s having our 9th child. Like, it can be scary, like that some of these choices are hard. It's hard to say, okay, God, like, how is waking up in the middle of the night going to make me the most joyful? Like, what is that going to do? But really seeing the way that when our yeses, our obedience to God, like if Joseph hadn't said yes and been obedient and taking Mary as his wife, like, would all of that have transpired, and so that obedient choice for Father Burke to become a priest, and he even shares, which I think is so beautiful, he's like, my life is so joyful and so fulfilled, and he knows it's because he's where he's called to be. Not that it doesn't have its challenges, like being a priest these days is like being the busiest dad around, but like he knows that like that obedience is not just for us to follow God's will, but like what God's will is for us, which is ultimately living in that beautiful balance of his goodness, in our lives and making an impact in the kingdom.
Yep.
Carrie, let me just interject. We have you beat on the age thing. My wife had our youngest, Claire Therese, when she was 50. So
that's great to hear. Like, I probably need to sit at her feet and ask her questions about this.
We need some advice. We need some help. Yeah.
Every doctor keeps like telling us, wow, you're
when the first statement's wow, that's usually it's like, wow, okay, well, I guess there you
go. we have plenty of good faithful stories I can share with you sometime.
Good to hear.
Pray for us. Yes.
Now, as a father, it can get very difficult with children, as you know. Patience. You're oftentimes running sleep deprived, working, coming home, helping with the kids. The moms are, need 4 arms more usually. But the father has to be a man of patience, because the kids see that as well as they do in the mother, and the example one sets. Patrick Lencioni, tell us about him, because I like the one line in there about, God wants all of you, and give everything to God, and be all in. None of this
Mhm.
putting your big toe in the water type stuff. Share with us what he had to share.
Yeah. Mhm.
Sure. So for anyone who doesn't know, Patrick Lencioni is very well known, just not even in the Catholic Church, but in the world, just his, he's done so much in the business world. Most, I think, famously is, his books on building teams in business world. They're New York Times bestseller for years. But he talks about one of the places where he struggled in virtue is in patience as a businessman. There is no, that word isn't even used.
Usually it's not a word that my supervisor would say or manager would say. Yeah, be patient, let that deal come through. That's not really what you hear from that feedback. So
yeah. And so that part of growing in virtue in this world that's so opposed to it, I think so often as Catholic Christians, we find ourselves well, this sounds like an ideal here, what the church teaches about virtue, and patience is a virtue. We've heard that our whole lives, but God, he didn't exempt Joseph in these places, even though it wasn't typical or normal. And so Patrick talks about his struggle, his real struggle. He's, with practicing patience in this fast-paced world. And I was really touched by it, because I think many men can relate to that. Okay, yeah, this is great if you're doing ministry, but what happens when you're a physician or when you're in the boardroom? How do you practice these virtues and stand in that gap? And I think it's been beautiful to see the way the Lord has blessed him in his ministry, or in his work, because he's looked at it more over the years as ministry, as touching people's lives through.
Yeah. And as a parent, I think it takes you back to realizing that, you can't, you always think that the kids know everything when if you haven't taught them or done it well before that, they don't. So you have to be patient and instructing and guiding the kids to make sure they have those skills and those ideas. So yeah, the patience is, how many times we're going to explain it? Well, do it one more time and see if they get it at that point. So there's a lot of patience that comes out of that as well. We don't always exude that, but the patience is key there to really show. And I think there's a lot of, I think the kids feel a lot of love when you show that patience. When we're involved with them, we're down at the level that they feel that. So it's important not to be rushed and spend that time.
Right. One of my lines I remember hearing and say is, Lord, give me patience, and I want it now. It's hard. It's hard.
Well, yeah, that's what I think was. Yeah, when you pray for patience, you get opportunity to be patient. You don't learn patience, so you just gotta understand it's gonna happen. So,
another chapter I found interesting, and it's so appropriate, is about the glory of home life and the pillars, the pillar of families, in Chris Benzener in his story. What was the point he was trying to make in all that?
Yeah, I mean, just a great example of, again, I think him discerning. So he's being obedient to his calling, right? Because he was discerning priesthood and going from there. And then, I think he probably embodies a couple of the other virtues, like, chastity and virtue and all that stuff too. So, but yeah, just a great story of him and Michelle, and just how they were open to life and open to ministry, and then open to adoption at that point in time later on with just what they saw in the world around them. Just, again, I think it's, what is that vision I had in my head of what my family looks like, or how am I going to be moving forward with it? And then what God's calling him and his family to do, and how to be involved in just the ministry they had at Steubenville. So, I mean, just all those things are tied into his story really, really well. And they're a great family. We know them as well personally. So it's just been great to see them, but just the openness to, what that family looks like or may not look like. And then just also, we also have friends that don't have kids, but just tremendous spiritual children. And they've taken that and grown that, and just the impact they've had and guiding these kids, and just now how many priests have come out of that, spiritual guidance that they've had. And again, they had the similar stories where older kids leave, and then they, but there's still that connection. They look at Chris as, kind of another dad influence or dad ability for them to have there. So it's not just, direct relationship or direct children, but, how you spread that throughout, and how you show and influence and provide guidance to others around you. So yeah, just a great story overall.
Yeah. And he really exudes that, it's really beautiful. I think so many of the guys were sharing their struggles, and I think his is just this beautiful revelation of how God planted, these different things in his life, and him continuing, like Dwayne said, it was just this beautiful gift of him falling virtue his whole life, and how that's flowered into this huge circle of family life. Like it wasn't just contained to the 4 biological children he had, or to the 2 adopted children from Haiti, but like to the way that they've done ministry. Like they formed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of youth missionaries, you know, like, and it's just an extension of his heart and their family, and just the beauty of that family life, which it's really beautiful. And I think about that too, in the sense with Saint Joseph, you know, like in that virtue, you know, like he is that pillar of family life, like, you know, and it's that beautiful silent strength, you know, of just continuing to offer his obedience to God, and how that's so needed. And that's what's missing, like in our society, just those men that are able to stand as those pillars of family life, you know. And
I think the quote that he talks about is a circle, right? So I think all of us view that circle kind of biological family, that's all we have, but really the church is one family. So how do we help everybody, you know, all the brothers and sisters that we have out there? And I think they show that, you know, very, correct. Yeah. So it's not just direct family genetic relationship, it's, you know, that whole body of the church, and the family relationship there is the key. So,
you know, I look behind me and I see the image of divine mercy, and really the people in your book, to me, exemplify how we're called to be Christ-like and to be a reflection and an icon of that image. And you guys put together the book, Man Your Post, Learning to Lead Like St. Joseph. And it's a great book. People, I encourage you to get it. Dwayne and Carrie, any closing thoughts before we wrap up today's show?
Thank you for having us. Just we really, you know, hope that if you do pick up the book, it touches you in some way and influences, impacts your lives. Again, if one story does something for you, that's all that we were hoping for when we put the book together. So
yeah, and I just want to echo what Dwayne said in the beginning, because it's funny. It was like one of those discussions, and I was like, and then we can say this and we can do that, and, you know, we'll talk about virtue. And he was like, but they need to do something. And I was like, yes, they'll do something. And then I was, you know, just getting so excited about the virtue, and he was like, no, we need to have some way to mobilize this mission. So at the end of each chapter, there is a mobilizing the mission. Like, what do I do? How do I grow in this virtue? You know, and really, like you said, Brian, so beautifully, like, you know, virtue, the way that we've gotten it and the way we've become catechized in it, sometimes it's kind of boring and dull. Like, it's not been this rich experience of, like, you know, the beauty of how that unfolds. And the truth of it is that that's our path to holiness, is growing in virtue. You know, it's freedom and growing in virtue. And so this book isn't just like some wonderful stories to help inspire you, but there's actually real tangible ways in which we can grow in this virtue. Like, simple, like, tomorrow you can go and do these things, which is really helpful, because I think so often we're like, oh, that's a great idea, but how do I practice this in the real? And I think men in particular, you know, he says this all to me, just tell me what to do.
We like checklists, right? But yeah, so I think sometimes the hard part is getting started. So if you get that first step going, that momentum starts to pick up. So very clear, actionable steps, a couple things, nothing overwhelming, and very easy, hopefully, to get excited about and start doing. So yeah, that's the point. So the plan. Absolutely.
Well, I think it'll help people learn the faith and live the faith. And that's what it's all about. Dwayne and Kara, I want to thank you so much for joining me today on Mercy Unbound. All the best up there at the JP2 Healing Center. And stay in touch. Keep us posted of any other books or works. And we look forward to having you back on Mercy Unbound. People, I hope you enjoyed the show. Please subscribe and spread the message here. Let us all build up the kingdom of God. And in the words of St. Louis Aymard, may thy Eucharistic kingdom come. Have a blessed day. God bless. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/Dr. Brian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.